Hey, this is Brett. We had a technical issue with today's episode. We uploaded the episode. Only half of it appeared on people's podcast players. Should be fixed now. Sorry for the confusion. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Brett McKay here, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Manliness podcast. When most people work out, they jump right from a resting state called Zone 1 cardio to Zone 3 cardio. But in skipping over Zone 2 cardio altogether, they miss out on a significant range of benefits to their health, fitness, and overall well-being. Here to unpack why you need to make the relatively easy yet hugely beneficial form of exercise that is Zone 2 cardio a big part of your life is Alex Viada, a hybrid athlete and coach. We spend the first 20 minutes of this conversation discussing the physiological science of what cardio zones are and what happens in the body as you move from one zone to the next. From there, we turn to the more accessible and practical elements of getting into Zone 2 cardio. Alex shares the easiest way to know if you're in Zone 2, and we discuss how it can improve your heart health, metabolism, sleep, and weight loss, as well as enhance athletic performance, whether you're into endurance sports or powerlifting. We then get into the amount of Zone 2 cardio you should be getting each week and how to get it, including Alex's take on the ever-controversial elliptical machine. After the show's over, check out our show notes at aom.is/zone2. All right, Alex Viada, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, Brett. Pleasure to be here.
So you are the founder of Complete Human Performance. This is an educational website where you provide education and courses on physical fitness, nutrition, but you also provide coaching for triathletes, powerlifters. You've done some coaching for special operations guys. Let's talk a bit about your background. How did you end up doing this, where you're coaching not only triathletes, but powerlifters, but also there's powerlifting triathletes as well. What's the story there?
So I guess the story there, I'd have to back up quite a bit, and I'll try to keep this brief and to the relevant points. So, back when I first started getting back into strength training shortly after college, I was very much of the powerlifting strength at all costs mentality, and it wasn't until about 2007 when I first got talked into running a 5K. And really coming close to having the walls close in on me in my first training run and realizing I was out of shape, that I really realized that there was, kind of this gaping hole in my fitness. And it was really the process of, going from a powerlifting background, strength training background, to wanting to learn how to not just be cardiovascularly, survivable, but actually be really cardiovascularly fit. And kind of at the time, and I mean, we're talking, kind of mid 2000s, the strength training and endurance training communities were very much split. There was the whole strength conceit of, cardio is anything more than 5 reps, and you go into endurance training, and very much the mindset among a lot of coaches back in that day was still that strength training was something you could do, and the strength training programs were absolutely horrible. I mean, I remember going through my USAT certification, USA Triathlon, and the strength training was, we're talking about people doing body weight lunges for sets of 20 to 25. It was really bad. And part of that whole process, that experience, and realizing that, if I wanted to be a powerlifter who was really good at running, I wasn't going to be able to talk to any powerlifting coaches about running, and I wasn't going to be able to talk to any running coaches about powerlifting. I kind of had to develop a lot of this on my own. And that was actually part of what went into the whole, when I wrote The Hybrid Athlete, that was part of what kind of prompted that entire concept, that hybrid training concept, was being able to, apply elite level endurance training methodology to powerlifters, and using the really depth of understanding of the opposite, quote unquote opposite sport, to really whittle out and get rid of all the noise and nonsense and prescribe to strength athletes what is the absolute minimum, most effective dose of endurance training to get results, and vice versa. So really taking lessons from the opposite side of the aisle, so to speak, and using that to optimize training for everybody. And that methodology, honestly, when I, in 2012, 2013, before the book came out, and then in 2014, 2015, really caught a lot of people's attention, I think. There are a lot of people who, they love strength training, they love the process, but at the time they were going, I don't like the fact that I gave up all of this running, or, I'm a powerlifter who's been doing this for years and I feel a little beat up. I want to try something different. I don't know, maybe I want to do a triathlon or something. That's what really got a lot of attention from a lot of different groups kind of all across the map. And it was really just a real process of being able to having the privilege of working with these athletes, but also speaking to their coaches and, speaking to triathlon teams and special forces and all these other groups and learning from them and learning their best practices and coming back to apply it to my practice overall. So it's really been just kind of this, way too late for a long story short, but talking to all of these people from all across different walks of life and different backgrounds and trying to take the best practices from each one and put them into my practice.
Yes, you've broken down that barrier that stands between strength and endurance. Because look, I come from a strength training background too. That's my main focus. And yeah, you always hear, well, you can't do endurance stuff because your cardio, that's just going to get in the way of your gangs and your recovery from your session. But I think that's starting to change. A lot of people who are in the strength side of things, they're starting to see the importance of the cardio element.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the reason I wanted to bring you on is because you're a big proponent of what's called Zone 2 cardio. In the past year, I've gotten really into this.
Yeah.
Because like you, I was doing a lot of strength training, heavy pulling, but neglected my cardio, and I just felt kind of crummy. And I thought, this is like there's an element of fitness that I'm lacking. So I've gotten really into it.
Excellent.
And I want to see bring your expertise into this. Before we get into the benefits of Zone 2 cardio and how to do it, we should probably start off with what we mean by cardio zones. I think people have probably heard about this. If you go to a treadmill at a Globo gym, you see like the zones that you can get into. So what are cardio zones scientifically?
So yeah, this is really interesting because I think even just trying to define them, you sort of get into some of the question marks that still even exist in the endurance training community. So the entire idea behind these zones, and first of all, what makes it confusing is there's more than one system of zones. There is a zone system from 1 through 4. There are ones from 1 through 5. I've seen ones out there from 1 to 7. But when we typically talk about Zone 2, what the heart rate zones or what the training zones roughly correspond to are various metabolic shifts that happen in the body as you progress from one level of intensity to the next. As you're training, as you're running, as you're cycling, as you're doing anything else, the body is compensating and basically utilizing the appropriate energy sources and undergoing the appropriate hormonal and neurological response to achieve whatever objective you have set for it with regards to actual stress, with regards to actual stimulus. When we talk about Zone 2 cardio, we're referring to a very specific sort of range of physiological stressors. The body is responding in a certain way to a certain level of intensity that roughly corresponds to the point just before a few metabolic shifts are made before you progress into the higher zone. So when we talk about Zone 2, it's not really about heart rate. When you look at a lot of cardio machines or you look at a lot of personal training certifications, they say, well, Zone 2 is 68 to 75% of your max heart rate. That's more correlative. Really, Zone 2 is referring to that period of time before your body begins to make that shift past its first ventilatory threshold, which really represents the point at which you start to get accumulation of a lot of metabolites. You get a shift in blood pH. You get a change in the amount of lactate typically found in the bloodstream. So it's really, if we think about cardiovascular training zones, consider them inflection points where the body is kind of progressing to the next level of energy generation. I think that's the best way to put it.
Okay, let's talk about that kind of a walkthrough summary of energy generation. So our body, to live and function, it has to use energy. And depending on how intense we are doing stuff, it's going to use different sources of energy. So let's just start from lowest, Zone 1, and then kind of work our way up. So when we're in Zone 1, we're just kind of sitting here, maybe taking a slow walk. What's our primary energy source?
Yeah, so the primary energy source in Zone 1 is still, you're basically looking at fat stores, fatty acids. Now, at all stages of energy generation, I always think of them as kind of dimmer switches. It's not like you only start using your highest intensity energy sources when you're performing 1 rep maxes. At any point, our body is using pretty much all available energy sources, just to varying degrees. When we're sitting here, predominantly, we are engaged. We are getting all the energy we need from fat stores. We have plenty to, kind of meet the energetic or the rate of energy consumption. The amount of glucose we're burning is pretty minimal, and the amount that's being actually converted and going down the lactate pathways is even smaller. So Zone 1 basically represents the point up to a level of effort where we are burning almost exclusively fatty acids, and we are utilizing nearly zero anaerobic processes, no anaerobic fermentation, the lactate system is barely being used, et cetera. So by far and away, we're talking, 95%, I'm sure the number is different, 95% fat burning, nearly zero metabolic stress.
Gotcha. And then we're also, the body's using oxygen to create that energy. And the energy too, it's ATP is what it's called.
Absolutely, yes. So basically, our body is utilizing oxygen. It's utilizing fatty acid lipolysis. We're breaking down fat, and we're using that all to basically, again, oxygen is the terminal acceptor in the electron transport chain. It is a very efficient system. We generate a lot of energy per quantity of fat used. It's great. Our bodies are very happy here. We can do this indefinitely.
When we get to zone 2, so we go from zone 1 to zone 2, are we just like upping the amount of oxidation going on?
We are, to a certain extent. Now, as we continue to increase in zones, what starts to happen is it's not just that the body is in aggregate doing more work. We're getting a lot of changes that happen at the local level in muscular tissue. Even as every muscle contracts, it briefly reduces blood flow to the muscle at the moment of contraction. And then, when it relaxes, obviously there's more. But overall, the energetic levels begin to rise. And when we're engaged in zone 2 cardio, so to speak, the oxygen levels or the oxygen requirements suddenly begin to spike. And what's going to happen is the body you're going to notice when you progress from zone 1 to zone 2, you actually start breathing more heavily. Not necessarily faster, but the depth of respiration increases. The ratio of shallow breaths to deep breaths, because, when we're all sitting here at rest, most of the time we breathe shallow, and every now and then we take a deeper breath. That ratio begins to change until we're taking almost exclusively deep breaths. We are still primarily aerobic in terms of energy systems, but there absolutely is, on a local level, a certain amount of utilization of anaerobic systems. In other words, a little bit of the fermentation going on, the lactate systems becoming involved, just to sort of generate that little bit of energy. And so zone 2 basically represents that point at which the metabolic demand is rising, but oxygen and fat stores are still, and obviously glucose stores as well, but aerobic systems are still responsible for the vast majority of our energy generation.
Okay, and as we increase intensity, we shift to zone 3. What's happening next?
At zone 3, what happens is you actually cross a point called the VT1, the ventilatory threshold 1. And this is actually going to go a little bit into how we determine these zones. You'll notice at the VT1, your rate of respiration begins to increase. And one of the things that's driven by, there are various, chemoreceptors and everything else in the body that detect the sudden change in blood pH that's caused from an aggregate rise in carbon dioxide. That basically means that CO2 levels in the blood, basically your body, the muscle cells they're utilizing energy at a faster rate than your standard aerobic systems can supply it at. So what starts to happen is your rate of respiration increases, your heart rate begins to increase, but we're already tapping more into kind of the anaerobic systems. We're tapping more into those fermentation systems. And the body is already at that point in this kind of delicate dance where it's not really able to sustain this indefinitely. We're already, again, anaerobic systems, when we don't use oxygen, they're a little bit less efficient. So the body is kind of on this slow path at that point towards a loss of ability to meet the energy requirements. So zone 2, you can't really do forever. Other things will break down, but you can do zone 2 for an exceedingly long period of time because it's so sustainable. Crossing that ventilatory threshold represents, again, a slow accumulation of these metabolites and a gradual slow decrease in our body's ability to sustain a given level of intensity.
And we're starting to make that shift from using fatty acids to using more, like starting to use glucose more to get that ATP.
Exactly. And not just using glucose, but also using glucose in anaerobic metabolism, which is actually less efficient. We generate less ATP or less energy per unit of glucose when we're processing it through anaerobic systems than when we're processing it through aerobic systems. So, it was kind of likened a little bit to like afterburners in a jet. Yes, we can produce a lot of energy that way, but we're using 4 times as much fuel, per unit of energy produced.
Oh, another difference between zone 2 and zone 1 and then like zone 3. With zone 2, zone 1, when you're using fatty acids and oxygen, the mitochondria in your cells are creating the ATP. And I think in glycolysis, we're using glucose to create ATP. That occurs in your cytosol. It doesn't occur in the mitochondria. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. In a lot of cases, like say a lot of the lactate producing systems can occur in other systems. So this is no longer strictly a mitochondrial based process. And in fact, again, the process of conversion of lactate back to glucose or back to glycogen is, much more systemic. This is less infinitely sustainable by those organelles. Yes.
All right. So zone 3, you're starting to use more glucose. What happens in zone 4? Is it just that you're just using more and more glucose? Like when do you start using other energy sources?
So when we actually cross into zone 4, that's where it gets a little fuzzier. The line between zone 3 and zone 4 is, as some people liken this to the ventilatory threshold too, it's when we actually start to get such a high utilization of these anaerobic energy systems that you start to really get, I wouldn't say an uncontrolled, but you get a steady accumulation of metabolites. In other words, the body is not clearing these metabolites. It is not able to sustain this level of intensity without an eventual crash. So we're using more anaerobic fermentation. We are getting to the point where the body is not able to keep up with the given level of work. And as a result, for example, the lactate levels, which are used, kind of go off into the stratosphere. And this is generally considered a level that the individual will rapidly fatigue at. In other words, there is constant accumulating fatigue throughout an interval. Whereas zone 3, let's say a gifted marathon runner can run the entire marathon in their equivalent of a zone 3. If they cross into a zone 4, they'll probably begin cracking. Now, of course, for a marathon runner, the difference between zone 3 and zone 4 is actually very small, but that's a different story. But basically, at that point, when you cross into what we typically consider a zone 4, that's unsustainable. We are using a lot more of very short-term energy systems, and we're using heavy amounts of anaerobic glycolysis, which causes rapid fatigue.
And also, when you like zone 4 and like zone 5, if that exists, there's debate about that. You start using creatine and like recycling ATP, basically, right? So it's like when your body uses ATP to create energy, it loses a phosphate or something, and then the body's like, okay, we can use that used up. It's called ADP now, and then we'll take creatine that's in the system and we can make ATP really fast, but it's not very efficient.
Right, exactly. Because what happens at lower intensity is ATP is constantly being generated. We're generating a huge amount of ATP per molar, or let's just say per gram of fat, we're generating a huge amount. And that's great when we're at rest because there's so much fat in our body, relatively speaking. We've got the equivalent of, tens of thousands of calories of work that our fat can do. When it comes to glucose, when it comes to glycogen, we have much less. Our liver only really has about 400 to 500 calories worth of work it can do, whereas our muscles have several thousand. So even so, if we think about it over let's say a marathon, we're probably, if we had to do that on strictly glucose, we would burn through our systems. But we would burn through that very quickly. Of course, if we were to do that even faster and go through a process of fermentation, let's say our muscles are capable of doing 2,500 calories worth of work with the glucose that's in them. That's through aerobic systems. If we do that through anaerobic systems, we're really only capable of doing anywhere between 500 and 600 calories worth of work with that same fuel. So not only as we go up in energy systems are we looking at smaller pools of energy, we are also looking at, on aggregate, the body being able to do less work with the stores we have available.
Okay, so just to recap here, zone 1, zone 2, you're primarily using fatty acids, you're using oxygen, and the mitochondria to create the energy or ATP you need to do whatever. Yep. As you shift into zone 3, you start using more glucose. And I think you made the point, this isn't like either or. Like this is sort of like it's a dimmer. I like that analogy. And then as you shift into zone 4, it's more glucose and maybe even using recycling previously stored ATP. Do you think there's a zone 5? Like what's your take on that?
So a lot of that really depends. And you can already tell that since everything is a dimmer switch, we're talking about pretty fuzzy definitions here. And I think that's actually where a lot of confusion comes in. And I think something that people probably want to reiterate is how complicated this actually is. It's like there's no definitive switch between zone 2 and zone 3, like even though we like to say there is. There's no definitive switch between zone 3 and zone 4. Some people include a zone 5 and say, well, that represents the pure alactic systems, as they call it. We're talking about such a high level of intensity that we are just using the ATP CP systems, for example. So that's just super high intensity, sprints of 10 seconds or under. That's, some people like to differentiate that. I don't particularly find it very useful because I think the entire purpose of planning in zones is to look at approximately, stimulus, how long an athlete can sustain it, and what it means metabolically. If you start to get into zone 5, you're almost looking at something that's sort of akin to higher rep strength training or explosive training, and it's not really a useful figure. So I only tell people to really worry about 1 through 4.
So I think it's a good background of science. We geeked out there.
Yeah.
Let's dig into this. Like when most people do cardio, what they think of as cardio, so it's like a run, or maybe they're doing a body weight workout. What zone do they typically end up in?
Most people, when they're doing cardio, if they just decide to go out for a run, they are usually sitting right in zone 3. And I think that really is probably at the heart of what a lot of we want to discuss today is how easy it is, or how often people think that they are not getting a cardiovascular workout unless they are exhibiting all the signs of actually being in that zone 3.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they think workout, you got to hurt, bro. It's got to be struggle and like out of breath and super winded. Like, why do you think the zone 2 gets the short shrift, particularly by weekend warrior type athletes? Because I think if you talk to professional athletes, they understand the importance of that sort of zone 2 stuff. What's going on with just the regular Joe who wants to exercise?
It's such a good question too, because I think a lot of it just comes down to based on what our concept of exercise actually is. And I think one of the reasons why this is tough is if you're a high level athlete and you're doing zone 2 work, you're still running pretty quick. I always talk about the story back when I used to train. I used to run around, Duke University. And because I have a sports performance lab there, they would sometimes have a lot of Kenyan runners come down. Again, some of the best runners in the world, best mid-distance runners that probably have ever lived. And it's funny because I used to run the trails down there, and these guys would pass me at probably 2 minutes per mile faster than what my, high zone 3, low zone 4 pace. And they would be having relaxed conversations the entire time. And I think for some of us who don't realize how good elite athletes are, we think, okay, these guys are going for an easy run. They're going fast. If I am not at the very least going for a fast jog, I'm probably not getting anything out of this whatsoever. If I'm not sweating, if I'm not working hard, if I'm not doing any of that, how can this possibly be exercise? What am I getting out of this? And I think it's a really dangerous mindset. And honestly, when I first got back into running back in 2007, that's part of what caused me so much harm to both my lifting and my running, is that's a lot of work. And I think for most people, they want to be seen as doing exercise. They don't want to think, well, if I'm going for a fast walk, oh, well, that's not training. Anybody can do that. I want to go out there and work. And not realizing that probably going for a fast walk for them represents zone 2. And that's probably what they should be doing.
And also, I think that something that contributes to that is just like the fitness literature, right? You pick up Men's Health and it talks about HIIT workouts. Everyone's got to be doing HIIT workouts. And
man.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't tell you when, again, back when I first started doing all this stuff, HIIT was everything. And, the whole idea was, hell, I remember, working with a lot of strongman athletes and talking to them. Because again, early on in my career, I was talking to other powerlifters. Well, what do you do for cardio? And strongman, what do you do for cardio? Oh, yeah, I push heavy sleds and, tire flips. And, that's my cardio right there. And, obviously we know that's still good stuff. But to them, that was kind of the minimum for cardio. Anything easier than that's just a waste of time.
Oh, so let's dig into more about zone 2. So how do we figure out what our zone 2 is? How do we know? Because you mentioned, so you said zones are more about the energy sources that we're using, the metabolites, the changes in hormones that's happening in our body. So how do we figure out if we're in zone 2 or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because there are a lot of systems out there. Some people use heart rate. And while that's good for some, the problem with using heart rate is, first of all, everyone's max heart rate is different. The whole 220 minus age or any one of those systems are really only good for about the middle 60 to 70% of the population. And even then, there's kind of a plus or minus 8 or 7 standard deviation on that. And what I mean by that is, let's say with 220 minus age, it tells me my maximum heart rate should be 178. Well, that could be plus or minus 8. So my max heart rate could be anywhere between 186 and 170. If I'm trying to calculate 70% of that, that's going to give me a crazy number. So I tell people, forget about the heart rate zones. Don't worry about that. Some people say, well, you should use a lactate meter and check that. That doesn't work either. The easiest way I tell people is, look, when we talk about zone 2, we're talking about a metabolic shift. So let's find the most obvious metabolic shift that happens with the most profound impact that you can see. and that would be your rate of breathing. So when I have people do a zone 2 test, which I also call a VT1 test, again, talking about the first ventilatory threshold, what I have them do is basically just continue to first start out at a walk, and then every minute increase their pace ever so slightly, tracking their heart rate and tracking their pace, until they get to a point where they can no longer speak a 15 to 20 word sentence without interruption. When they get to that point, it represents that inflection point where their rate of respiration is increasing, which corresponds to a change in blood pH. And the reason that's so accurate is because that change in blood pH right there, and that change in the need to breathe and respiration rate, almost perfectly corresponds to those various metabolic shifts that represent the shift from zone 2 to zone 3. So basically, when you can't carry on a conversation is legitimately when you're making pretty much the biggest metabolic shifts out of zone 2. It is the easiest way to determine it, and it's actually, interestingly, one of the most accurate, even in a lab setting.
So the talk test is
the talk test. That's it.
So yeah, with the heart rate, I've seen different stuff, and what's confusing about the heart rate thing about zone 2 is that you'll see different percentages.
Right.
So I've seen one, like the one that I've seen a lot is 70 to 80% of your maximum heart rate is zone 2. But then I've also seen like, well, no, that's too high. It's like, it's actually 50 to 65. What I've done to hone in on my zone 2 intensity is I did the estimate based on your age.
Yep.
And then I use the talk test to refine it. So like the estimate based on my age kind of gave me like a ballpark to be, next to. And so I'll use my Apple Watch and I'll get there. And I think right now it's like 140 is like, for me, 70, 80%. And then if I can still talk, then I'm in the right spot. That's how I've done it.
Exactly. Yep. And that's it. That is by far the best way to do it. The heart rate will kind of give you that starting ballpark. And from there, you very much, and I think that kind of drives home the point, though. It takes a little bit of trial and error. You actually have to go out there and you actually have to read your body a little bit and say, okay, well, is this working for me? Because again, the other thing is each one of us has a different heart rate reserve in different zones, like difference in heart structure, difference in, there's so many other factors that can be involved in changing where these zones are that I think the way you're doing it, the way you're articulating is perfectly right.
What's your thoughts on one thing that I've heard on there's like a researcher that does a lot about zone 2, and he says to get the most benefit from zone 2, you want to get as close to the upper end of zone 2 and stay there as possible. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's pretty accurate. It's, again, we're talking about dimmer switches here, but it's a little bit like saying when you're weight training, it's going, okay, well, what's the difference between, 1 rep in reserve and 2 reps in reserve? If we're looking at, like, say, an effective reps model. And by that, I mean, like, obviously we don't want to train to failure. Let's talk about zone 2 is training less than failure. Obviously, the closer we get to that threshold, the better, the more work we can do per unit of time, without getting to the point of diminishing returns. So going much below that VT1 threshold, I think it's tempting to sometimes back off a little bit too much as well and go a little bit too easy. So I think the take home here is we want to make that conscious decision to operate as close to that ventilatory threshold or that zone 2 threshold as possible. Otherwise, you're leaving a little bit out there on the table every time. And again, the purpose of zone 2 is not to say go out and be lazy. It's saying control your throttle. And that means, of course, don't go too easy either, because then you're probably not getting much of a training stimulus.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I would agree with that.
I want to throw another shout out to the Apple Watch. They got a new feature now when you do your exercise. It'll actually show you like what zone you're in. I don't know if you've seen this. And it'll actually have like this arrow and it'll be like, you're at the bottom end of zone 2. And then it'll start getting closer to it'll start shifting and then it'll tell you, well, now you're in zone 3. It's, again, that's great. It's not super accurate, but it gives you an idea. It's nice to have that number there to help you hone in on it.
And I just got to say from a personal level, at first I resisted a lot of wearables and a lot of devices, and now I use them so heavily in my coaching. And I think for a while there, I felt like people were relying on them too much. But what I really like now about a lot of the feedback that they give is they do force a lot of people to be a lot more in tune with what they're doing. So rather than just going, okay, I'm just going to go out for a run and zone out, which can be good for you sometimes, don't get me wrong, but having that sort of feedback and being able to be a little bit more deliberate in how you construct your training, it's really caused a lot of people to pay more attention to what they're doing. And I think that's a great thing.
We're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. And now back to the show. Okay, we've talked about what goes on in zone 2. We talked about how to know if you're in zone 2. Let's start talking benefits of zone 2 because people are like, well, what's the big deal? Why should I do this? So how does zone 2 improve metabolism?
So, I think the benefits of zone 2, you can pretty much almost say they're synonymous with exercise in general, because it's just such a great way to get 95% of all the vaunted benefits of any sort of cardiovascular training while minimizing a lot of the downsides. So as far as metabolism goes, we're looking at a whole range of things. We're looking at the same improvements in nutrient partitioning and same positive effects on insulin sensitivity and glucose disposal. All of these things absolutely play a factor. And as you engage in zone 2, you are actually upregulating a lot of the mitochondrial enzymes, and in fact, your entire mitochondrial profile, to actually more efficiently burn energy anaerobically. We're looking at huge benefits to glucose disposal. We're looking at huge benefits again to our ability to actually perform more work on an hourly basis than we would have in the past. So even the quality of our NEAT is improved because we can be more active, because our heart pumps more efficiently. Our mitochondria are actually generating more ATP at rest, or have the ability to do so, which allows us to be more active in general with less cost. Metabolically, it lets us even get more out of our weight training sessions. We can increase the density of our weight training sessions because we're recovering faster in between each individual set, which is, I think, something we don't take into account. If I'm doing a weight training program at all, if I can take a little bit less rest time in between our sets, I can potentially do more sets. I can potentially do the same amount of work in less time, giving me more time to do other things. Overall, it allows for a higher level of activity at a similar level of aggregate stress. And I can't think of a single downside to that.
Yeah, and I think I've read research that whenever you do zone 2 at like that upper end of zone 2, your body starts like in a response to that, it's like a stress, right? And so your body adapts. And so one thing is, so your mitochondria gets more efficient, but then your cells actually start producing more mitochondria. And so you're able to produce even more energy, which gives you all those benefits you just talked about.
Exactly. Like I said, a mitochondrial profiles, which is not just the enzymes in the mitochondria, but it's the number of mitochondria as well. It's a profound difference. You're basically making every single cell a lot more efficient, a lot more capable of generating energy. And, honestly, it reduces a whole host of other things. Like, for example, there's less oxidative stress because we're able to metabolize energy more efficiently in the oxidative system. We're looking at less metabolite production at any given level of intensity. So we're looking at the same daily activities causing us less stress, less hormonal stress, less oxidative stress, because we do a lot of zone 2 cardio.
Let's talk about zone 2 and cardiovascular health. What's going on there?
Sure. So it's got a lot of the same benefits that we typically associate with cardio, bigger stroke volume, better contractile, less, ejection fraction, which is the percentage of blood that's actually pumped out, goes up. One of the best things about zone 2 cardio, though, is the increase in cardiac preload, or what is called eccentric hypertrophy of the heart. So one of the most important things when we look at the heart muscle is not when we work the heart, when we train the heart, it's not just that the heart gets stronger. Concentric hypertrophy of the heart is basically strengthening and thickening of the walls of especially the left ventricle to allow the heart to pump harder and pump more blood out on every contraction. That's not the whole picture, though. See, the heart actually becomes more efficient when it actually takes more blood in. So when we think about it, after the heart pumps and now it's re-expanding and relaxing, what zone 2 cardio does by increasing the overall rate of blood circulation is you're actually increasing the amount of blood flowing into the heart. And zone 2 cardio is right in that sweet spot where that quote unquote preload that allows the heart to actually take in the optimal amount of blood actually causes the heart muscle to stretch a little bit. The more eccentric hypertrophy, which effectively refers to the flexibility of the heart, the more of that we get, the more efficient the heart becomes. And not only does the heart become more efficient, but we also alleviate some of the issues that come from excessive concentric hypertrophy, which can include things like changes in signal propagation through the heart. So basically what I mean is this: if all we do is high intensity work, we are doing a lot of, let's say, almost muscle building, bodybuilding for the heart. But by doing so much of that without doing enough lower intensity work, we're not also doing everything we can for the preload, for the elasticity and flexibility of the heart. Doing zone 2 work allows our heart to beat more efficiently. It allows us to pump more blood per contraction. And it's also extremely good for the overall, I have another way of saying, like, signal quality within the heart muscle itself. So it's a little bit like if you go too hard all the time, it's like trying to, do a bike pump too quickly. It's not efficient, right? Or it's like trying to pull a rower too quickly. Anything where the optimum rate of cycle is not super fast. If the heart is doing nothing but pumping really hard against like contracted muscles, because all you're doing is sprinting and your muscles are, working super hard, you're not going to get those same benefits to preload and elasticity that you get from the lower intensity work. So for cardiovascular health, it really represents a sort of critical part to the puzzle that you're actually missing out on if you do nothing but high intensity work.
Does that, increase in volume of blood in the heart, does that trickle down to other parts of the vascular system like arteries, veins, capillaries?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that increase in vascular elasticity is actually a big part of it as well, because that takes place pretty much across the entire system. Because arteries are already fairly strong. They're muscular vessels. They're fairly strong. But again, if we are simply contracting the heart really hard against occluded vasculature, like let's say I'm contracting my quads really hard because I'm doing a set of squats or I'm doing a set of sprints, my heart is really pumping hard against that. The arteries are, contracting basically to try to force that blood into that working muscle. That's not always ideal. The elasticity, allowing for the constant blood flow and, basically allowing the, increasing capillary perfusion, increasing the number of capillaries and blood vessels, and actually doing everything it can to reduce that back pressure a little bit actually does improve arterial compliance. Or in other words, that is just one other measure of overall heart health and artery and cardiovascular system health. Again, potentially reducing the likelihood of future vascular disease. So it's extremely important.
One thing I've noticed too with the sort of a metric I've seen is that my cardiovascular health has been improving since I started Zone 2 is my resting heart rate has been going down since I've started. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially because, doing a lot of Zone 2 work as well, just in terms of even the autonomic nervous system, is nowhere near as stressful. Because it does. Obviously, you're improving your heart health and the amount of blood pumped per contraction, which all lowers your resting heart rate. But also, it really helps shift the autonomic nervous system balance a little bit more parasympathetic when you're at rest, which can also do wonders for your ability to relax, lower your resting heart rate, sleep better, all those other things.
On a similar note, is there any research about Zone 2 helping with mood disorders like depression or anxiety?
That's interesting because I think it's difficult to test and it's difficult to isolate Zone 2 directly from a lot of other cardiovascular activity or a lot of other cardiovascular training because pretty much all exercise does help with a lot of these things. What's interesting, and I think where we have to start to find correlates, is Zone 2's effect on things, again, like sleep quality and like the lower incidence of sleep disruptions. Because one of the challenges with exercise, particularly to treat anything from mood disorders to depression or anything else, is that exercise has its own set of stressors. And if people are already dealing with, some form of depression or mood disorders or sleep disorders or anything else, exercise certainly has positive effect, but it can also do things like compromise sleep quality if done at too high intensity, or it can, create its own level of stressors. It can create its own, high amount of sympathetic drive during the exercise itself. The nice thing about Zone 2 cardio is both kind of theoretically and in certainly preliminary research I've seen, it does seem to be able to convey a lot of the benefits of exercise on various mood disorders, depression, et cetera, but without a lot of the potential costs to overall individual stress. So again, it's sort of that sweet spot where you're getting the benefits of a lot of this exercise without a lot of the potential cost. So in aggregate, it represents a great intervention for anyone, again, dealing with issues like depression or distraction or anything else. There are also a couple of other interesting benefits to doing things like running outside. I think, talking anything from, the phenomena of ocular flow to just, again, greater sun exposure and all that, but that's a different issue.
Yeah, I've noticed that my sleep has gotten better since I started Zone 2, because before, when I was just focusing on strength and powerlifting, I would, I'd have my rest day and was, well, you don't do anything on a rest day. Your muscles got to recover. And then, since you don't move your body, like your body's like, well, you're not tired. So you're going to have a crappy night's sleep. But since I've incorporated the Zone 2, since it's low impact, doesn't destroy you, but it still tires you out enough where you can have a good night's sleep.
Yeah, and it's great because one of the other things is also when we're talking about things like, sleep cycles and the suprachiasmatic nucleus and melatonin release and, all those things that govern things like your circadian rhythms, being able to engage in an activity that is constantly improving your body's ability to process and dispose of glucose, and basically undergo a lot of that process of digestion and metabolic shifts and all of that kind of stuff. It allows the body to go through its normal sleep-wake cycles a lot more smoothly and efficiently. So, you look at a lot of things like decreased sleep latency, the spending less time transitioning between different phases of sleep. All of that is extremely positive, improves your sleep quality, great for sleep architecture, all of those kind of trickle-down effects.
Another benefit is I've gotten trimmer since I started Zone 2. Like I'm not as fat, I'm not as chunky as I used to be. And it's what's crazy is it's not hard, right? And it's just it's weird. I've had to start eating more because to actually gain weight, because I'm burning more. Like I'm probably burning an extra maybe 1,500 calories a week by adding in Zone 2.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing that's great about it too, is the whole concept of kind of caloric flux or metabolic flux, which is the idea that let's say you just remain isocaloric just by lifting and doing as little activity as possible. Now, let's say I burn 500 calories a day from doing Zone 2 work, but then eat an additional 500 calories a day. All else being equal, the greater the overall caloric or metabolic flux, in other words, the greater the amount that you both burn and take in, the better your body composition is going to be at the end of any given time than it would be otherwise. So one of the best things you can do overall to look better and feel better and everything else is move more and eat more to compensate.
So metabolic flux, eating more and exercising more is good for body composition. And Zone 2 cardio helps with that because it's a type of exercise that you can do a high volume of and it's not going to beat you up.
Exactly.
But is it good for weight loss in any other way? I mean, I think a lot of people might have heard of Zone 2 as the fat burning zone, right? They're at the treadmill at their gym. They see, oh, you were in the fat burning zone. Is that an accurate label? And will it help you lose more fat relative to other types of exercise?
Yeah, so that's kind of been one of these things that was, I think, originally from a metabolic standpoint is maybe not wrong, but it's really not right either. Because really when you talk about fat burning zone, you have two questions. You're saying, well, okay, am I burning the most fat possible, per minute of activity, and am I burning the biggest proportion of fat compared to other substrates? Because technically, the highest intensity work you can possibly do burns more fat per minute than any other level of intensity of exercise. I mean, if I go out there and I'm just, sprinting along and, running at peak velocity, I'm probably going to burn more absolute fat overall and use more aerobic systems overall in the course of 10 minutes than I would by going slower. But the problem is there are so many other limiting factors that overall, if that's all I do, I'm probably not going to end up burning that much directly. The biggest fat burning zone as far as intensity goes would be if I'm just sitting here lying flat on my back, for example, the percentage of energy I'm generating via, fat oxidation is the highest. So Zone 2 kind of represents in aggregate, it is where the percentage of fat is still notably high and the volume you can do is the highest. So all else being equal, that's the point at which, over the course of a week, I can burn the most fat while not simultaneously not burning out and not working at too high an intensity. But it's kind of meaningless because, fat burning and body composition change is so much more than just how much fat you're burning during exercise. So I think in that regard, it's a bit of a misnomer. And you know what? If you're trying to do activity to maximize caloric flux and you're trying to do activity to, burn the most while simultaneously taking in significantly more, Zone 2 is probably the only way to really get your caloric flux up high enough, unless you're the kind of person who can spend 8 hours on their feet per day walking around. Like Zone 2 really does help you maximize your caloric flux. And in that case, it's one of the best for body composition. But just as far as actually being in a fat burning zone, it's not, again, what you burn during exercise isn't necessarily indicative of whole body metabolism or body composition change.
Well, another thing, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think a lot of times when people hear fat burning zone, they think, well, it's burning the fat on my belly.
Yeah.
And not necessarily. I think our body's efficient. Getting to that stored fat, that takes a lot of work, and it's only going to go there when it really needs to. So if you're burning fat in Zone 2, you're likely just burning the fat you've consumed in the past 24 hours.
Yeah, and that's really it. And I think that's the shift people need to think about in their mind is your body is going to make use of what energy stores it's going to make use of in whatever order it deems most efficient. It's not going to say, oh, you're in the fat burning zone. Let's immediately ignore all this glucose floating around the system and, lipid and everything else that's, in the GI tract digesting right now. Let's go straight to the belly. No, it's not going to do that. It's going to use the easiest, most accessible stores for energy. And again, and what we're getting at here is what really taps into that, quote unquote belly fat is when your body decides in its own metabolic calculus that it's time to really tap into those stores from that particular area, which, is going to be so much more a function again of lifestyle, aggregate caloric intake, a whole host of other things that we could probably spend an hour and a half listing off.
Okay, so that makes sense. So zone 2 can help you lose weight. So it's allow you to lose body fat because it can help you exercise more. And if over the aggregate, if you do that long enough, your body's going to start dipping into that every now and then to help you shed some of that stuff.
Exactly. And you know what, I think the reason why I think it's personally great for body composition changes, again, like we're talking about, it lets you do so much quality work that has a beneficial effect on your metabolism, has a beneficial effect on mitochondrial profiles, insulin resistance, all of that. It lets you do a lot of it, and it still leaves you the recovery you need to do a lot of the especially productive, higher intensity work, the lifting, everything else. And, again, letting you really keep that, caloric flux relatively high, with very low recovery cost.
So I think we made a good case that zone 2 it's great for cardio health. It's great for your metabolism. It can help with things like, type 2 diabetes. It can help with sleep. Let's talk about for people who are, they're an athlete. They have like a sport they're trying to focus on. What's the benefit of zone 2 cardio for endurance athletes? Because this seems counterintuitive for like a guy who likes to do 5Ks or whatever. Like, why would I go really slow if I need to, usually you think, well, I need to train fast to go fast. But what you're saying is like, actually, no, you need to spend most of your time going slow. How does going slow help us go fast in a meet?
Well, I think what's really interesting is, if we're familiar with polarized training, it's the whole idea that you do 80% of your work at zone 2 and 20% at zone 4. So in other words, in your training, you're doing most of it easy and some of it hard. Interestingly enough, a lot of that was arrived at just by observing elite athletes. Not by saying, okay, we're going to try this, but by saying, okay, let's see what the elite athletes are doing. And interestingly enough, if you look at the true elites, in many cases, they're doing 85% of their work in their zone 2 or up to 88% of it in their zone 2. But I think what's really interesting is, of course, if you look at their high intensity work, it's the total number of high intensity minutes they're doing per week, not the number of high intensity workouts. So just to break that down a little bit, I think when a lot of people think about doing, like, say, an interval workout, they say, okay, I've got a 45-minute interval workout coming up at, say, 45 minutes of hard intervals. In that workout, they're probably only spending about 10 to 15 minutes actually doing hard work. The rest is rest periods. When you're putting together a polarized program, all that high intensity work, you only count the minutes you're doing high intensity. So I think that's one thing I want to make sure people know is that when we talk about doing most of it easy, remember that that's still a lot of hard work. So when people think, okay, well, I don't want to go easy if I want to go fast, it's remembering that since the hard work you're doing is so tough, there's no way you can do enough of that to get in the overall quantity and quality of work you want to do. It's a little bit like saying, okay, so to be a good runner, to be a fast runner, I've got to, obviously improve running efficiency and leg turnover speed and all these various components of, metabolism and all of that. But realizing that zone 2 allows you to do a tremendous amount of work to, again, improve the number of mitochondria that you have, to improve the amount of fat and glucose you can burn aerobically. All of those things are basically increasing the size of your engine and letting you do more of the high intensity work, which is going to translate to being able to actually do an aggregate, a whole lot more training, a whole lot more quality training, and spend a lot more time developing all those factors in performance that just take a lot of time and volume to develop. It takes a long time to develop the mitochondria to be a good runner. It takes a long time to build up your heart strength to be a good runner. If you're just doing zone 3 and zone 4, you're probably burning yourself out before you can do enough work for those slow adapting energy systems. You're being held back by overall stress. You're being held back by sheer exhaustion and muscle soreness and all of those things. And eventually you burn out. You start to get sleep disruption, all those other things, long before you're actually dosing your heart and mitochondria with the optimal stimulus to be the best they can be.
So yeah, that's a good point. The more you do zone 2, you're going to get more fit. You'll be able to move faster, but still stay in zone 2. right? So it's like, that's what I've noticed. I've had to, as I've done zone 2 for a longer, like I've noticed I have to go faster to actually get into my zone 2 range. And that's why you watch these Kenyan guys, they're like in zone 2, but it looks like they're sprinting to you, but their body's like, no, this is actually zone 2.
Yeah, it's crazy, because I watch guys like, are you familiar with Alexander Sorokin, the ultra runner?
Yeah.
I mean, look at the pace he went for 100 miles. Look at the pace he can do for 24 hours. I mean, for him, that's an easy zone 2. For some of us, I think for a lot of people listening, it's like, well, that would be a really fast mile pace. So it really does. As we get that incredibly efficient, we start to get better and better. And again, it increases the density of work we can do as well. Because we're recovering faster between intervals. So not only are we getting faster at our zone 2, when we decide to then do other work, we can do more of it and recover faster, which makes it a more efficient workout.
But it's going to take a while to get there. It's like lifting weights. You're not going to deadlift 600 pounds in a month. It's to get that speedy zone 2. It's going to take maybe years to get there.
Yeah. Yep, it does. And I think the thing that is people sometimes get impatient with it, and they think, okay, well, this isn't getting all that much better, but it does. It takes time. And as long as it's providing a stimulus, it's doing what you need. Sometimes things just take time. And it's not as gratifying as HIIT, where you can just push yourself harder, and every week you push yourself a little bit harder. It is so much easier in some ways with HIIT workouts to just push yourself harder with every week, but not actually be adapting more. You're just adapting yourself to an uncomfortable stimulus, so you're getting better at pushing yourself hard. You're not necessarily improving in your fitness, which is why some people will see themselves hit a wall after 6 to 8 weeks of high-intensity training. It's because they haven't really been physiologically improving. They've just been improving in their pain tolerance. They've been improving in their familiarity with the movements, so they get better, but they really haven't gotten better as much as they think. They've just gotten better at the task itself. They're not necessarily much fitter.
Okay, so if you're an endurance athlete and you're going to start zone 2, you got to be patient. It's going to seem like you're not doing anything. Like it literally, there might be, if you're just doing like the couch to marathon thing, you might just be walking, like a fast walk, and that's going to be zone 2. And it's going to be like that for a while, but over time, you'll be able to speed up while still maintaining that zone 2 range. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, so we talked endurance athletes. What about strength athletes? We mentioned some of the benefits kind of in passing. Let's focus more on that. So you came from the strength world. You're a power lifter. You're a big, strong guy. I think you deadlift like 700 pounds, I believe. 700 pounds.
Actually, you set a PR this year, so I'm pretty happy about that.
What was it?
747.5. Okay. And I say that because the 2.5 fell off the outside.
No, that's dang strong. That's a great poll. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So, like, how does Zone 2 help guys who like to pull 747 pounds?
So here's the best thing, and this is actually the story I always tell, because this was actually a client of mine. He was a powerlifter, a competitive powerlifter, Australian. A very, very strong guy as well. We're talking about a dude who's pulling close to 800 pounds. He's obviously stronger than I am. It was really funny because I had him doing a lot of zone 2 work. And it wasn't until about 6 months in, because he resisted the process a little bit, but he was a good sport. He always did it. He started taking his bike to and from the gym, just easy cruising and all that. And it was really funny because after 6 months, he sent me a note, and he said, I never really thought about some of the benefits this was having besides heart health and everything else. But I noticed when I was going through my squat workout now, I was able to put my knee wraps on for the third set without needing to stop for air and without feeling tired. And I thought that was probably one of the most impactful, relevant things I've ever heard a powerlifter say, because what Zone 2 work was allowing him to do was get through his training session and get through all the work he had prescribed with less overall fatigue, which you take any two powerlifters or any two strength athletes and tell one of them, look, I can get you to competition day having done 15% more work than everyone else around you at little cost to yourself. What would you say? And most of them, if they know what they're doing, would say, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to be able to do more work. I'd love to be able to program in a little more sport work and a little more high intensity, true power production work without fatiguing. That is one of the biggest, most profound benefits, again, besides benefits to health and everything else, is we're saying that recovery in between every set, your ability to focus and brace yourself for the next set and mentally get yourself keyed up and potentially do more work in the same period of time, or to continue doing work without actually letting yourself cool down in between, which can be a real problem for some lifters. You're telling them All you need to do is this 20 to 30 minutes of zone 2 a couple times a week. It's not going to interfere with your training because it's so low intensity. We're not telling you to go out and do tire flips. I'm telling you to get on the elliptical or the bike for 30 minutes. That's easy. And you tell them this is going to make it so you recover faster in between every single set. And when you do your next set, you're going to be better recovered, feel fresher, and have more energy. So you're going to get more out of it. That is an undeniable advantage of this type of work for any strength athlete.
Yeah, so instead of taking an hour and a half to 2 hours for a training session, it could be an hour, maybe 45 minutes.
Yeah. And even then saying like, hey, you know what? One of the biggest problems, I think especially you see this with a lot of older school lifters is say, look, if someone's got to take 8 or 9 minutes in between sets of squats, it is a really, really, between very heavy sets, it's really tough to stay engaged. Your muscles are already cooling down. Your cardiovascular system is working so hard to get all those energy stores back that is not the most efficient or effective way to do it. You want to be relatively fresh. You want to be able to just go in and bang out that next set with less rest. And you say, okay, look, we're going to reduce that to 3 or 4 minutes. You're going to get 4 quality work sets worth of work done. And that's going to give you time to do a little bit more accessory work. You might be able to do a little bit more foam work. It might even free up more time to do some of that, mobility work that you've been putting off that you skip every single session. So there you go.
Yeah, I've noticed that since I've started zone 2, I don't have to rest as much between sets anymore, which is great. It used to be like 5 minutes between a heavy. I can do like 3 minutes now, it adds up.
It really does. It really does. I mean, especially when you're talking about a lot of athletes, a lot of strength athletes, when they're training, it's like, hey, you're not eating, you're not resting, you're not doing anything else in that time. You're literally, this is just creating new minutes in your day for you, which, I mean, that's great. And yes, of course, there's the cost of actually getting on the bike, but we're talking about quality work time.
Okay, so if you're into strength training, zone 2 cardio can give you better quality workouts in a shorter amount of time. So then you can do other stuff like, accessory work if you're more competitive, or if that's just something you want to do. Or, it can just be just a way to get some time back for whatever. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what I like about it. Like my workouts are shorter now. Yeah. I mean, as you say, you have to add the time in for doing zone 2 cardio into your schedule. But it's nice not to have your weightlifting workouts, have to stretch on and on.
Right.
Another benefit I found in my strength training from starting zone 2, and I don't know, this is just completely anecdotal. This is in one scientific experiment on Brett, but it's helped with some injuries that I've had, like especially tendon injuries. Mm-hmm. It's just nice to get there and get some blood flowing because like the tendons they're not a vascular tissue. There's not a lot of blood going there. So the more you can get there to it helps that recovery process.
Yeah. And, and actually any modality you do, there's of course, bone remodeling and tendon remodeling and all of that kind of stuff is a slow process. And of course, even non-impact zone 2 represents some sort of additional, stressor on the bones and tendons and everything else that strengthens them over time, potentially in ways that strength training doesn't. So yeah, overall, you're going to be more robust.
So we talked about the benefits, and say someone's listening to this, like they're like, I want to do this. How much zone 2 cardio do we need to get the maximum benefits of it? Like what's the minimum effective dose?
And, I tell people anything more than 30 minutes a week, they're going to see some. I tell most people, look, hey, if you can start out at 80 minutes a week, you're in good shape. Now, the recommendations go all the way up to 180, which sounds like a lot. But, I mean, if you break that into 45-minute sessions, it's not that crazy. But I basically tell people, look, if you can do 3 25 to 30-minute sessions per week to start, you are already getting a lot of the benefits out of that.
Gotcha.
That is... talking about minimum effective dose, if you can't make time to do that, I don't know what to tell you, but that is literally all you need to start.
Any advice for strength athletes? Because I think they might be, because they're so indoctrinated to think, well, cardio is going to get in the way of recovery and gains. How do you like to incorporate zone 2 into your strength athletes programming?
I literally tell them, look, do this at the end of one of your sessions. If you want to, pound a protein shake or anything else beforehand, go for it. But the thing I'll typically tell them is make sure you use a modality that you're comfortable with. Don't think you have to run. Don't think you have to bike. Don't think you have to do anything. Find some modality that you feel like you can do comfortably. It can even be the elliptical. In fact, I'm a pretty big fan of that piece of equipment because it's so low impact. You are not fatiguing any muscle that you're otherwise using. You're not going to interfere with anything because it's so different. You want to do something that at the end of a session, you feel like, okay, this isn't really a stressor. So I'll tell them, look, hop on the bike, hop on elliptical, do the stepper, do whatever you want, and don't hesitate to mix it up. because the modality matters much less than what your heart rate is doing each time or what your heart is doing each time and, what your muscles are demanding. So don't be wed to the idea that you have to do this or you have to run or you have to do anything. It's all good.
Yeah, for me, the way I've done it is I train Monday, Tuesday, strength train. Wednesday is off day. So I do an hour of zone 2 then. And then Thursday, Friday, strength train. And then on one of those days, I'll do HIIT. Like I'll do the assault bike, just all out or some sort of body circuit. Then Saturday, Sunday, it's an hour of zone 2 on each of those days. So I get 3 hours. I try to get 3 hours.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's honestly for a lot of people, that's the ideal structure right there. I mean, again, some people quote unquote love a day off. I personally don't. I like to do something every day. But yeah, I mean, the way you've got it laid out, and that's the nice thing about it is, since it's really so easy to recover from, it's not like your Monday workout is going to be tough because you did, an hour of easy work on Sunday. I mean, humans are meant to be able to do an hour of easy work on a given day, not pay for it. So it's actually a good thing.
And but if you can't get an hour, that's okay. Shoot for 25, 30 minutes, 3 times a week, maybe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always tell people that some is better than none. If you've got an aspiring power lifter who says, look, I can give you 2 20-minute sessions per week. Is that even enough? The answer is yes. Absolutely it is. You're going to see a difference.
I think the hardest part for me starting zone 2, because I wanted to shoot for an hour. I've read that, I want to get the maximum benefits. I like to maximize things, but it's just boring. And so you got to find something to do. So what I've done is I watched Cobra Kai. I got through Cobra Kai on Netflix, and now I'm rewatching 30 Rock while I do my zone 2. And it's been great.
Honestly, that's perfect because, when I do zone 2, I'll sometimes play video games. I sometimes do my Instagram Q&As when I'm sitting on the bike just because it forces me to stay in the talk test. Yeah, doing something that, kind of gets you a little bit out of your head, makes it a little bit less painful, like psychologically painful for some people. And that's all good. And that's actually one of the things I look forward to is I also say, look, this 60 minutes that I'm doing this is me time. I can do whatever the heck else I want during this time. I don't have to do anything because, I'm training. I'm doing something that's good for my heart. Whatever else I want to do at this time, that's great. This can even just be my 60 minutes of quiet meditation time. It's perfect.
Or you can listen to the Art of Manliness podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go.
Highly recommend.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I really look forward to zone 2 cardio now because I just like how I feel afterwards. You get that sweat going. It just feels really good. It's the only time I give myself to watch TV. So yeah, I really enjoy it. So you mentioned modalities. It's basically anything to get your heart going. But are there any ones that you like a lot?
So for me, I still have my triathlon bike hooked up on a trainer. The reason why I love the bike for me is I've been cycling long enough that I'm a pretty good cyclist. And for me, that's an easy way to get my to get into the zone 2. And on the stationary bike, I can do plenty of other things. That's always been one of my favorites. I love air bikes and airdynes just because you don't have to push particularly hard to get into zone 2 because it's so many different muscle groups working at once. And honestly, one of my biggest recommendations is the elliptical, which I think gets unfairly maligned by a lot of people. But it is provided you find an elliptical that fits your body size, because they have a lot of different sizes and shapes and they're not great for everybody, it's a great piece of equipment.
Yeah, I do. I use the ellipticals when I like. We also have an incline treadmill. So I just crank that up as high as you can. And then I go going I think the speed is like 3.5 and that will get me at zone 2. The one thing that I had trouble with when I first started experimenting with zone 2 is I tried just like running outside. I noticed I would immediately get into zone 3. Like I wasn't even going that fast. And I would be like, I have to walk. And then it was just off and on. So I based on my experience, I wouldn't recommend outdoor running because it's just so easy to move into zone 3. What are your thoughts about that?
Honestly, I totally agree. I do a lot of VT1 tests for new clients, and most of them, I'll set the treadmill to 4%, and they will be hitting that zone 2 long before they get to a run, and that's totally normal. It takes quite a few years actually to be an efficient enough runner, unless you're very light. It takes a lot of years to be efficient enough that you can comfortably run, as opposed to even just kind of shuffle jogging at zone 2. So yeah, that's very normal. And that's why, same thing, honestly, if people are saying, look, I would love to be able to just go out and go for a run or, go run some trails or something, if it gets me out of zone 2, well, look, hey, if you love it, you can still do it, but that's not zone 2. I would recommend something else.
And also if you're a strength athlete, that's a stressor because you do your pounding against the ground, and that might
Absolutely.
not be great. One recommendation I have, this came from my wife with her experiment with zone 2 cardio with running, is if you're just starting out with running and you want to do that zone 2, like do it on a treadmill.
Yeah.
And she found that useful because you can set the treadmill flat. You can keep it at a slow, constant speed.
Yeah.
And she said even then you'll have to stop and walk because, you'll quickly go into zone 3 and have to walk.
Yep.
But she found that just by doing that steadily, the treadmill run, she was able to get to a zone 2 run outside eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Because one of the biggest challenges, of course, is with zone 2, being able to work up that threshold, that VT1 threshold. If all you do is run outside and push yourself too hard every single time, you are really going to burn yourself out, probably at a faster rate than you're going to make all the progress you want. You'll see great progress for 8 weeks, 12 weeks, but you may end up hitting a wall and you may end up really struggling. You may be struggling to get in the volume that you need. You may be struggling to, have energy for your lifting sessions and everything else. So that's when it really becomes critical to say, oh, wait, maybe I should have slowed down here quite a bit. And treadmill is great because, contrary to the belief in some circles, the mechanics are not appreciably different than running outside. Basically, if you look at it from a biomechanics standpoint, there are very, very minor differences. And overall, like you're saying, it really lets you control that throttle, and it takes some of the, I guess, self-imposed pressure. When people are outside, it's very often difficult to realize how slow a 12, 30-minute mile jog may be, or keep yourself doing that walk run and not overcook it. It's difficult. You said, like, hills up and down. And also people just don't like going out and moving slowly. They're thinking, okay, either I'm going to walk or I'm going to run fast. I'm not going to do this sort of walk, jog, slow moving, looking at my watch to making sure I'm not, to make sure I'm not going too fast. It's again, as throttle control, it is such a great tool to use. And yeah, absolutely. Like, if people really are serious about this and, they want to say, okay, well, I want to do this right. Yeah, the treadmill may not be the most exciting option, but, especially now, it probably, depending on the time of year, it could be even preferable to going outside. And it's worth getting used to it because it also very much teaches pacing, which is something I think a lot of people have trouble with. So it gets that in your head. It lets you control your pace, control your output, provide some valuable lessons, and it can in some ways help you make more sustainable progress. So that's a great tool.
And then another thing she noticed with her running in zone 2 cardio is that she even got the benefit to her running by doing zone 2 in other modalities. Like if she just did a walk on an incline treadmill for her zone 2, she saw that transfer over to her race times. They would dramatically drop and she got a lot faster.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great. Yeah, because I think the other thing is with zone 2, again, there's much more transfer between modalities than a lot of the higher intensity work. So yeah, again, walking, hiking, rucking, cycling, even elliptical, all those things do have pretty good carryover and represent a good way to vary the direct, I guess, cost and stressors while maintaining most of the stimulus.
So we've talked a lot about zone 2. What about, like, is there a place for zone 3 in your training at all? If you're like an endurance athlete or just a weekend warrior type guy?
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of very good training programs that are called kind of sweet spot training, where you spend a good 30 or more % of your time in zone 3, which is a little bit more usual. Like it's a valid form of training. I think the important thing to remember, though, is that if you are also a strength athlete, first of all, zone 3 work, it's neither the most efficient way to develop a lot of those like speed systems or higher intensity energy systems, nor the lower intensity energy systems that zone 2 does, just because you can't do nearly as much of it. If you are aiming to train for a 5K or a 10K or aiming for a triathlon, it's worth spending some time in that zone 3, doing things like tempo runs, tempo rides, etc. Interestingly enough, though, when you look at polarized programs, which is, again, just zone 2 and then high intensity, and sweet spot programs, which are zone 2, zone 3, and high intensity, the outcomes are almost the same, but what shifts things in favor of zone 2 is a lower likelihood of injury and a lower likelihood of burnout or overtraining. So you certainly can do it. And I think if you are a newer runner and you're looking to do something like you want to get a good 5K time or something else, it's probably worth spending some time there just to get used to what it's like pushing yourself for a 20-minute period at that zone 3. As it stands, though, it's a little bit like saying, okay, I'm a strength athlete and, I want to do, heavy singles, doubles, and triples. That has its role, and hypertrophy work has its role. But what about doing sets of 6 with 3 reps in reserve? You're going, well, there's a training effect to it. It's just not really optimal for anything. You can do it, but it's not the best answer to any training question you could ask. That's the way I look at it.
What about zone 4/5 training? What's your take on that?
Yeah, honestly, if you are just a strength athlete and you're just doing this for health, I would argue you don't have to do that kind of work. As long as you're doing some kind of basic strength training or anything else, or even like calisthenics, bodyweight training, anything else, I would argue you don't need to do that if your only concern is health. If your concern is performance, you do need to spend some time, anywhere between 12 and 20% of your time in those higher range systems, because those do improve a lot of those, actually shorter term energy systems and things like intermuscular coordination and all parts of those things that truly potentiate that base you're building. So if you don't do those, you're going to be holding yourself back. But again, the nice thing about all of this is it really only takes a dedicated period of 6 to 8 weeks to absolutely max out your higher intensity adaptations. In other words, if you've been doing nothing but zone 2 and you go, I wonder how much fitness I've built. Let me start doing some high intensity stuff. If you do a good amount of solid high intensity work for 6 to 8 weeks, you'll see your potential.
No, I think if you played like football in high school, you saw how quickly you can get in, like, quote unquote, in shape, right? Because you're just doing like wind sprints like all summer, and then you're in shape, and then you can see how quickly it goes away. If you just stop it, it goes away really fast.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So for me, for like zone 4, I'll do 2 sessions a week, and they're short. It's like no more than 6 minutes, where I'm kind of doing like maybe an Airdyne circuit. 60 seconds on really hard, 20 seconds rest, like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I tell people that's fine for 99% of us are going to realize most of the benefits from that. So yeah, that's the way I go with it.
Well, Alex, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to learn more about your work?
Yeah, so best place is I'm on Instagram at alex.viada, or they can look up our Complete Human Performance Instagram, which got links to all our sites, educational materials, coaching. You can find my book, The Hybrid Athlete, there, which, oh my God, it's at this point, it's getting on close to 8 years old, I think, and thinking about writing a new version of it now that hybrid training has gotten so big. But I would be, again, old book still has a lot of info on it. So yeah, that would be the places to check me out.
Awesome. Well, Alex Viada, thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Brett, thank you so much. Real pleasure was all mine.
My guest today was Alex Viada. He's the founder of Complete Human Performance. You can find more information about his work at his website, CompleteHumanPerformance.com. Also, check out our show notes at aom.is/zone2. where you find links, including a link to an in-depth article that we wrote about Zone 2 cardio, the science behind it, the benefits, and how to do it. Check that out, aom.is/zone2. Well, that wraps up another edition of the AOM podcast. Make sure to check out our website at artofmanliness.com, where you find our podcast archives, as well as thousands of articles written over the years about pretty much anything you think of. And if you'd like to enjoy ad-free episodes of the AOM podcast, you can do so on Stitcher Premium. Head over to StitcherPremium.com, sign up, use code Manliness at checkout for a free month trial. Once you're signed up, download the Stitcher app on Android or iOS, and you can start enjoying ad-free episodes of the AOM podcast. And if you haven't done so already, I'd appreciate it if you take 1 minute to give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps out a lot. And if you've done that already, thank you. Please consider sharing the show with a friend or family member who you think would get something out of it. As always, thank you for the continued support. Until next time, it's Brett McKay. Remind you to listen to the AOM podcast, but put what you've heard into action.